I will.
So we're going to start in Mirz Hashem, Lulav HaGazul. And right now we'll start in English and we'll see if any Hebrew speakers, join us, and then we can switch to Hebrew. Okay then? John, you ready to go? Okay. So the Mishnah begins in the third Perek on Daf Chav Tes Amud Beis with a Lulav and the laws of the Lulav. Now, the first question I wanted to raise here is based on the pasuk itself, because the pasuk obligates us in 4 minim, correct? There's the Lulav, and then there's the Aravos, the Adasim, and finally the Esro. And the truth is that, generally speaking, the rule of thumb is that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, when he writes the Mishnah, he follows the pattern of the Torah itself. Like, for example, the Gemara at the beginning of Shas points out that Rebbe starts with Kriyat Shema Shel Arvis because the pasuk starts with Ubeshalbecha and then goes on to Ubekumecha, which means the Torah starts with the night Kriyat Shema until it moves over to the day Kriyat Shema. So we have a definite pattern in which the Mishnah will, shall we say, reflect the image of the Torah and follow that lead. And Chazal explain that that is very, very important, because one shouldn't think that there's what we call in Hebrew a netek, that separates between Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh. So Chazal look in every way possible to connect Torah Shebechsav, the written Torah, with Torah Shebal Peh. And one of the ways they do that is by formulating the language of the Mishnah to reflect like a mirror image of the language of the Torah. However, what I'll ask you to do is, if you don't mind, open up a Chumash, Vayikra. I'll give you Chumash. No, this is it.
At the bottom of it.
Here we have. Here's one.
Yeah, there's a big cross. Two cross.
Here, if gentlemen, you could take these.
We have also,
because we're going to be referring to the psukim, quite regularly. So you want to open up here to Vayikra Perek Chav Gimel, which we read just yesterday, and we're going to look at pasuk Mem. So that's 23:40, right? Mm-hmm. And what does the pasuk say? Ulekachtem lachem. You have it?
almost.
Okay, we'll wait another minute. Yeah. So, because this is going to be important for us. Ulekachtem lachem vayom harishon. Now, the first of the list of 4 is called pre-Eitz Hadar. And we'll have a lot to discuss with regard to those 3 words, but they form one phrase, one term, which is referring to anybody? To the Esra, correct. And then Kapos Tmarim is referring to the Lulav. And then we have the Aravos, which is called Anaf Eitz Avos. No, excuse me, that's the Hadasim. And then Arvei Nachal, finally to the Aravos. And then the Torah goes on to describe a mitzvah of Simcha. So if the Mishnah is meant to parallel and mirror image the language of the Torah, including the sequence of the Torah, which of the Daled Minim should have been taken up first by the Mishnah? The Etrog, right? The Etrog should be first on the list. Now, in truth, as we'll go through the Mishnayos, you'll rely on me right now for a second that the Esrog is only to come at the end. The Mishnah is going to first start a discussion of the Lulav, then it's going to go on to a discussion of the Adasim and the Aravos, until finally, at the end, it's going to come back to the Esrog. And that's strange that instead of starting with the esrog the way the Torah did, the Mishnah starts with the lulav. And why is that? And this is something that occupies the minds of the commentaries on the Mishnah, and that begins with the Tosas Yontif, the Tosas of Kiveger, and the Pnei Yeshua picks up on. A lot of the Achronim are very interested in this question: why does the Mishnah start with lulav? Anybody could think of some special halacha or expression of the significance of the lulav in the context of the Daled Minim?
Yeah, make the bracha.
Excellent. We make the bracha on the lulav. Asher kitshanu v'tzolsa v'tzivanu al netilas lulav. So that itself seems to give a special status to the lulav. And one was wondering, why does the lulav have a status? You know, if you would ask me to pick my favorite of the four, I would have picked the esrog probably.
Right.
I know in Ushpizin, I don't know if you saw, he spent 1,000 shekel on an esrog. Okay, I'm not saying he had to spend all that money, but yeah, everybody likes a nice esrog. Well, you didn't see Ushpizin, I guess. So anyway, there's a very famous movie, you know, that Ushpizin, yeah, he buys an esrog for 1,000 shekel when 1,000 shekel was worth a lot of money. But nevertheless, we make the bracha on the lulav. And the fact that we make the bracha on the lulav seems to indicate that the lulav has a special status.
As well as the etrog also has a special status. Of course, it's first in the posuk.
Correct. So we have to balance between the two. Which gets precedence? So we could suggest, as one possibility, that lulav trumps esrog, because lulav really is the ikar of the form minim haraya. The proof is in the fact that we make the bracha on the lulav, al netilas lulav. But I think that's incorrect. And I'll tell you why. The word lulav has two meanings in Allah. It's a single min of 4 minim, and it also represents 3 minim. Why? Because we have a halacha called agad. Right? Are you familiar with that, Dov? Agad, Aleph Gimel Dalid, not the name of the bus company, which is also Aleph Gimel Dalid, but rather that we bind together. That's called an aguda. The hadassim and the aravos are bound together with the lulav. And we'll see later on that the Gemara says that the reason why we make a bracha on the lulav, al netilas lulav, is because the lulav includes 3 out of 4 of the minim. And I thought that would be an excellent answer to that question as to why the Mishnah pushed lulav up to the front here, lulav, etc., etc. And the reason is because the word lulav refers to 3 out of the 4 minim. So although we have deference and respect for the esrog, the pre-eitz hadar, which is first in the sequence of the pasuk, but nevertheless, we sort of overcome that preference in favor of 3 minim as opposed to 1 min. But I'll tell you why it's wrong.
I'm not right.
Right, don't write it because it's wrong. It's a nice havamin. I really thought it was a pretty solid answer to this question, but it's not right. I'll tell you why. Because the word lulav has a different meaning. It means 1 of the 4 meaning. It doesn't refer to all 3. Sometimes the word lulav refers to 3 out of 4. For example, if you take a look on Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis for a second, again, we're not up to that yet, but just to sort of fast forward, Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, 31b, you'll see, like if you count down from the top of Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda, you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And it says Lulav, Sarich, what's the next word? Eged or Agad. Let's see how he vocalizes it. Just one second. I have a Masechet that has on one side of the page, it has the vowels. I'm just curious to see. Just give me a second here. Trouble with the Masechet is I have to keep turning pages and pages. That's the Gemara I have in front of me.
Eged.
He has Eged?
Eged.
Ah. Okay. Lulav Tzarech Eged. What do you say?
If they show up. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Hopefully they'll show up.
Yeah.
Now, on this halach of Eged, so you have to know where is the lulav, where are the aravas, and where are the hadassim. Correct? So if you take a look at the first of the wide lines, the Omar Rabba, do you see such a thing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it says there, lulav biyamin. And then it says esrog b'smol. Okay, now what does lulav biyamin mean?
You're not in.
Grasping it.
No, actually, lulav biyamin means that the lulav itself should be in the right hand, correct? Like you said, though. And the esrog should be taken up in the left hand. Correct?
Correct.
Now, what does the word lulav mean in this context? One could argue that it refers to all three minim, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all on the right side relative to the esrog. Are you with me on that?
Mm-hmm.
So that the word lulav here on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, lulav biyamin, could mean all three minim. That makes a lot of sense, does it not? Because otherwise, the statement of Rabbah should have related to the aravos and the hadassim. Like, where are they supposed to be?
No, it's obvious then.
Right.
I mean, they all tied together.
Correct.
So
So
wherever the lulav goes, the others go.
exactly. So lulav biyamin is referring not just to the lulav per se, but also to the hadassim and the aravos, which are shlosha minim agudim b'yachad. And that's called the lulav. And that would support our answer that maybe the word lulav in our Mishnah refers to 3 out of the 4 minim, and that's why lulav is taken up first. Hello, anybody home? Gentlemen, are you following me? Yeah? So again, since we have a precedent on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis that lulav biyamin is a reference to 3 out of the 4 minim, and we apply that to the word lulav here in our Mishnah, then we understand maybe perhaps why Rebbe gave precedence to the lulav over the esrog, because the esrog represents 1 out of the 4, whereas the lulav represents 3 out of the 4. But I still think this is wrong. Why? Because if you take a look on Lamed Beis, again, we're just flying a little bit ahead of ourselves, and you'll see that about 2/3 down the page on Lamed Beis, 32b, you'll see the Mishnah, and it says Hadas, etc., etc. We're on Lamed Beis, you'll see a Mishnah on the bottom, and that refers to the Hadas. Now, if you fast forward to the Lamed Gimel Amud Beis, then it refers to the Arava. So what does the word lulav mean in our Mishnah? You follow me? in the second Mishnah, the same dinim of HaGazul and Yavesh, which we'll speak about in Mirz Hashem.
This is Rashi, the first Rashi.
Wait. I'm trying to lead up to the first Rashi, but yeah,
It's basically the same
you want to
word.
give me two more
It's the
minutes.
same word, obviously.
Not only, yeah,
Same word. It's the same,
but not only is it the same wording,
but they're
what does that indicate
They're
about the
separate.
word lulav in our Mishnah? If the
That's
word lulav
one
would
thing.
refer to all three, to telling me that HaGazul
No,
is
one.
possible and Yavesh is possible, Shalashera is possible, etc., then there would be no need for the second and the third Mishnayos. The fact that the second Mishnah, and it refers to Hadas, to tell me the same dinim that apply to Lulav in the first Mishnah of the Perek, apply to Hadas in the second Mishnah, and in the third Mishnah, Arava, the same dinim apply to Arava, then by definition, what does the word Lulav mean in our Mishnah? Exactly, it means the Lulav and only the Lulav. And then we're back to square one, and we don't understand why the Mishnah would have begun with Lulav when the Torah itself begins with the Esrog. So we had a very good chance, a shot, as we say in basketball, at giving an answer to this question, that the word Lulav here refers, as it does on Lamed Aleph on the base, Lulav miyamin, which means he grabs the Lulav together with the Hadas and the Aravas on his right hand. And then the word Lulav includes all three minim, and that's why it trumps, the Esrog, which is only one out of four minim. But we see clearly that the Mishnah did not refer to Lulav as part of a set of three minim, but rather the word Lulav isolates Lulav alone. And in that case, then Lulav has no apparent superiority over the Esrog. Yaakov said before, we make the bracha on the Lulav. That's because we're making a bracha on the Lulav insofar as there's an Agad in which the Lulav has both Adas and the Arava, so it's 3 out of 4. But in our Mishnah, where the context of our Mishnah, Lulav refers in an isolated way to Lulav alone. And we're again stuck with that question as to why the Mishnah chooses to speak
is listed last.
last on the list. Very, very strong.
I would say,
Yeah.
I mean, Pashut. What do? We hold the Lulav and the Etrog, the Lulav and the Arava and Adas in one hand,
Right.
and the Etrog in the other hand. This is the Lulav. The other two are like, decorations.
Like secondary kind of?
Part of it, Lulav means this is the Lulav. If it's got the decorations, it's got the decorations, it's also the Lulav. That's the important one.
Right.
Yeah.
In any event, in this Gemara, which is called the Masifta, he has an introduction to our Mishnah. And in the introduction, he quotes the pasuk that we saw, Chav Gimel in Vayikra pasuk Mem, with all the four minim. And then he writes here in a note, which is number Yudalit. Yeah, you don't have it, but we can maybe photocopy it. John has it. And that is, Af she'esrog nichtov tchila b'pasuk kodem alulav, she'tchila nemar ulekachtem lachem prietz hadar, v'rak acher kach kapos tmorim, mikol makom shona hatana es dine alulav tchila. And why is that? He says, I'm not going to read every word of it. He says that the Lulav is gava mikulam. This gives a halachic chashivus, a yichus, as we would say, to the Lulav because it's taller than the other minim. So what does that mean? So I thought that maybe, when you have the agad, for example, we call it a lulav, even though it's three minim, but we call them one, like it says lulav miyamin when it's referring to all three because they're bound together. But why the lulav? So he's saying because it's the tallest of all the minim. Now
that's why it's first in the Mishnah.
Right. So that's why, first of all, we're going to make the brach on the lulav. Secondly, that's why when you have the three minim bound together, like in the case of Lulav B'yamin on Lamed Aleph and Beis, we call it Lulav. We don't say Shlosha Minim Ba'agad, we say the Lulav. And it's all this, and the fact that the Mishnah begins with all this is tied to one fundamental principle, that the Lulav is Gavah Mikulam. It's the tallest of the minim. So in my mind, I'm not such a tall guy, maybe that's why I would say with this, but it didn't seem to me that there's so much significance to the Lulav, the brachas on the Lulav, and all the agad is on the Lulav, and on top of that, we start the Perek with Lulav, is all because the Lulav is tall. I like height, if you watch basketball, American basketball, the tall guys, those are the guys that get the ball in the thing. But why should that have any halachic significance? Anybody?
Oh.
Ruvain, John, Dov, Yaakov, anybody help me out over here?
Most noticeable, I don't know if that's, you come in, you have a lulav, people notice it.
But you're going like this, though, so I think you're saying something. What are you saying here when you go like this? What's that called in halachic terms?
Party.
It's called nanuim.
No. Okay.
Now, what's nanuim? So we're going to see later on that when you shake the daled minim, the lulav has to be at least one tefach higher in order to achieve nanuim. So let's say, for example, the adasim and the aravos are 3 tefachim in height. The lulav has to be 4 tefachim in height. Why? Says the Gemara, for nanuim. So the complete mitzvah of ulakachtem lachem in its perfect ideal state is with nanuim. Again, I don't want to jump ahead of ourselves. We're going to have a whole plugta of machlokas whether nanuim should be done immediately when he takes the lulav, or he should wait till Hallel, and then nanuim is part of Hallel. But we see one thing, and my Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik, I didn't hear any shiurim from him on this Perek, but I used to attend his shiurim before Yontif. Every Yontif, Rav Soloveitchik used to talk a little bit about the Yontif. And very often, he would point out that the mitzvah of lulav has another dimension to it. It's not just like any mitzvah, like achilas matzah or hearing the shofar. So we just shake the lulav and take it. But lulav has an additional unique dimension of hallel. Otherwise, he used to argue, how could we shake the lulav in the middle of hallel? Would anyone think that in the middle of hallel I could eat matzah? Or in the middle of Hallel, I could hear the shofar? It's a foreign element. It would be an interruption, a hefsek in the Hallel. And yet, in Hallel, we take the daled minim, and we shake them here, and we shake them there. And again, there are complicated dinim about how to shake them and when to shake them. It's a whole siman in Shulchan Aruch about this. I once calculated like 18 different shitas exactly how to do nanuim. And you go to a shul today, and probably you'll see about 3 or 4 variations, of how to do nanuim.
Now, wait a second, but nanuim is connected to Hallel?
Correct.
Or the holding the lulav is connected to Hallel?
So that's what Rav Soloveitchik used to point
Nanuim
out.
is connected to Hallel.
That you could fulfill the mitzvah of lulav, like matzah or like shofar, with a ma'aseh mitzvah, just a mechanical act. And that's called, in the language of the Gemara later on, mida'ag be nafik be. As soon as you lift up the daled minim, again, we'll have to see how many tefachim he has to lift it, yotza, nafka, he fulfills his obligation. But he's still lacking the ideal kiyum mitzvah. And the perfect kiyum mitzvah is to integrate the lulav into hallel. And what is the agent, the mechanics of integrating the lulav into hallel? It's called nanuim. Why? Because the Torah says, Atze yar yiranenu ka. The trees in the forest will sing the praise of Hashem.
Say the person again. I'd say what?
Atze hayar yiranenu ka. I think you'll see it in Hodu, at the beginning. So Rav Soloveitchik would say that when the trees in the yar, in the forest, sway back and forth, that's arena to Hashem. Again, there's a lot of metaphysics here that probably goes into Kabbalah, but that's what David HaMelech says. Atze Yar Yiranenu Ka.
Where's the puzzle?
I don't remember right now which kapitel it's in.
I'd say what?
Atze Yar Yiranenu Ka. And the Gemara is going to quote that pasuk in the context of Nanuim. And Nanuim is primarily in the Lulav. Why? First of all, I proved that from the fact that the Lulav has to be one tefach higher for Nanuim. But furthermore, I prove it from the pasuk, because the pasuk says Atze Hayar, right? And Atze Hayar has a specific relationship to the Lulav. So that if there are two fulfillments, two kiyumim, as we would say, to the mitzvah of Lulav, one kiyum, which is the basic kiyum, in which Lulav, like matzah and shofar, has a maisa mitzvah, just a mechanical maisa, then Lulav is not superior to any of the other minim. It's all on the same level. But once we introduce a second kiyum, a second fulfillment of Lulav, namely the kiyum of Hallel, now Lulav has a prominent role to play, and it sort of emerges from this generic, group that includes all four minim, and it now takes on its own specific personality or its own specific role as a major primary part of Hallel. Through what? Through Nanuim. So that's perhaps, again, this is just, I'm speaking based on what I heard from my Rebbe, but I'm going a step further, and I don't know, I can't promise you if he would smile or he would be upset with me, I don't know. That if Lulav plays a major role in Hallel, that's what the Mefarshim mean when they say it's Gavah Mikulam. And I asked you the question, okay, are we playing basketball here? I had to throw the ball to the guy who's 6'9", he's 3 meters high, he's above the. So who cares if the Lulav is taller than the other meaning? But I think in the light of what I heard from Rav Soloveitchik in those shiurim before Yontif, namely, that there's an additional kiyum that's unique to Lulav. What is that? Hallel, right? Right? That during Hallel, we take the Lulav, and why? Because we're now being Mahal Hashem, not just with our verbal declaration, not just what we call Dibur Peh, but also through the Atze Hayar. We link up somehow to the Yiranenu Ka of the Atze Hayar. And the Atze Hayar primarily, although it refers to all four minim, specifically and primarily to the Lulav. And that's the Atze Hayar. And that's why the Lulav has to be one tefach taller than the Adas and the Aravos for the purpose of Nanu.
Atze Yar doesn't say Lulav.
Right, but Atze Yar is referring to the Lulav. How do I know that? And we'll see later on, the Gemara is going to establish based on the Mishnah that you need a fourth tefach for the Lulav. And if he doesn't have a 4 tefach high Lulav, he's not yotzi the mitzvah of Lulav. And why? The Gemara says because he needs the 4 tefach for Nanuim. And the question is, well, okay, very nice. Nanuim is a nice, shall we say, embellishment to the mitzvah, but it's not the essential mitzvah. The Gemara says, Mida Agbe Nofik. But again, these are all Gemaras that I'm mentioning in advance. I don't want to give you all my shiurim on the first day, then I'll have nothing to talk about.
Nanuim is that extra tefach.
Correct. And when you shake the Daled Minim, you see the Lulav. Why? Because the Lulav towers above the other Minim. And that's why the Lulav must have, it's absolutely critical, a 4th tefach. And in the light of what Rav Soloveitchik was saying, that the kiyum of Lulav is a twofold kiyum. It's not just the fundamental mechanical act of mid'agbe, of lifting up the Daled Minim, but it's also the act of Nanuim, that Nanuim which is integrated into Hallel, because Nanuim adds another dimension to the Kiyum HaMitzvah, namely the Kiyum of Hallel, and the Lulav itself has a major role to play in Hallel, and the Nanuim halacha in the requirement expresses itself in the 4th tefach. which is only true for the lulav. It's not true for the other minim. The lulav has to tower above the other minim, one tefach for the purpose of nanuim. And why? Because nanuim is a kiyum of halal. And we now answer the question, how can we take the lulav in the middle of halal? Would anybody dream of integrating shofar in the middle of halal, or matzah in the middle of halal, or any other mitzvah? Let's say I want to recite kiddush in the middle of halal, it would be a hefsek. So why am I shaking the lulav in the middle of halal? The answer is that the nanuim clinches that kiyum of halal, and dafka through the lulav. What do I mean dafka through?
How's it connected, the nanuim to the halal?
Because atzei yar yiranenu ka. That's a metaphysical principle, that somehow the atzei hayar are involved in rina. Now you might ask me, well, an eitz is an inanimate object, correct? So what we're interpreting is that when a human being, specifically a Ben Yisrael, takes the atzei hayar, with that atzei hayar, he could be yiranenu ka. It's a rina. It's a halal. It's extolling the Almighty. And how? Through nanuim. And that's why the nanuim is integrated into the halal. Otherwise, lulav would be a foreign element. It would be an interruption and a hefsek in the middle of halal. But we do the nanuim in halal, and here the lulav plays that major role, because although, again, I need all daled minim, but the lulav has an extra element of nanuim. It's almost like the leader of the pack, if you follow what I mean. You see a group, but where's the leader of the group? I don't know, have you ever seen if you go through, like Europe or so, you have the, how do you say in English, the Morei Derech, the tour guides, excellent. And the tour guide holds a flag sometimes. You ever see that? Yeah. Okay, maybe Yaakov, you Baruch Hashem, I
never toured Europe.
You never toured Europe. But if you go, for example, to Italy, I'll give you one example. Like you go to Rome, wherever you turn in any of the sites that you'll see a flag. Who's holding that flag? It's the tour guide. He's leading the pack. When I was in the army here, so we went out on what's called a masa, on a trip, a hike. We were 101 chayalim in the group, and the mafaked, the officer, would lift up something. Sometimes it was an M6 or an M16, so that 101 soldiers could see where he was taking us, and we would follow in suit. The lulav in the daled minim, in the kiyum of nanuim, is the leader, and it's going to rise above the other minim, and we're going to follow the lulav. Follow your lulav. That's the key point that we're trying to make, and that's the extra additional element or dimension of netilas lulav, which is fulfilled through nanuim, and specifically during Hallel, because through this nanuim of atzei hayar yiranenu ka, we will fulfill an extra dimension of rina. And who's leading the pack? Who's the tallest? Who's the atzei hayar in this context? It's the lulav. And perhaps that's what they're talking about here when they say, well, you know what? We make the bracha on the lulav. We do the agad of two minim together with the lulav. And we're going to start the Perek with lulav. Why? Because it's the tallest of the minim. Basip pshat. Well, what does it mean? Where do we find in halacha that the fact that one object is taller than the other, that gives it significance? Although the Chazal do tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu was quite tall, but I don't know, if therefore the height of Moshe Rabbeinu, he tried to get Og Melech HaBashan, you remember? So he was 10 amos high, he jumped 10 amos high, he held a hatchet that was 10 amos high, and he reached the ankles of Og Melech HaBashan. But what am I telling you? I'm trying to tell you that I don't believe for one moment that Moshe Rabbeinu's status was enhanced by his height. And for example, we have what do you say?
Why not? Height is something, It's,
maybe
tall people they have something. They have a.
Yeah. Okay, so if you're satisfied with the pshat here, you don't need me. You don't need verse for that. No, that's fine.
No, I'm not saying that's the only thing.
I'm just saying it's the language here he's quoting a whole school of thought here is that the reason why we make the bracha on the lulav and the reason why the lulav is the subject of the agad of two other minim, and the reason why the Perek is started in lulav, he says, because lakach chashavu mikulam. Why is it more chashav than the other words? Shehu hagavah mikulam. I wasn't happy with that. You know, learning is always divided into two levels. One level is you could be happy with what you have, and that's great, right? But sometimes learning is enhanced dafka when you're not happy with what you have. So it's up to you. You know, I can't twist your arms or anything. But we'll see in Mirza Hashem as we go along. For example, we're going to try to prove based on a ritva that Lulav HaGazul, a stolen Lulav, has a special psul. There's a psul in any of the four meaning that's stolen. But there are repercussions with regard to Lulav that don't apply to the other meaning because the Lulav was stolen. And the ritva quotes the pasuk, Atze hayar yirananu ka. So once again, we see that you want to take a lulav for a mitzvah, and you stole the lulav, and this mitzvah is meant to be yirananu ka, that there's an element of shavach v'odaya when you take the lulav, and again, we said it was specifically on nuim, and the ritva says that generates a new psul of mitzvah ba'aver with regard to lulav. That doesn't apply to the other meaning. So we do see that Atzei Ayar puts lulav on a special category. And maybe that's what they mean when they talk about gavah miku. All right. Think about it. And
Go back and you ask yourself, then why the Torah put petrol first?
correct.
Nowhere.
Excellent. Dov is asking a brilliant question. At the end of the day, after we spend so much time trying to figure out why lulav has a special status, in terms of the bracha, in terms of the agad, we see it here that the Mishnah chose to begin with lulav, and we push the esrog to the back of the to the back seat, and yet the Torah chose to write esrog first. That's those kash. Gewaldige kash. I don't have an answer to that question. What else? I wanted to point out something else here. He says that lulav maybe was mentioned first for a different reason entirely. And what is that? He says the following. Hadinim hashnuyim behemshech HaMishnah, right? We have a whole bunch of dinim here. Like, for example, if you fast forward, you'll see niktam rosho. If the top of the lulav was cut off, or nifritzu olav, which means that the various leaves of the lulav was separated one from the other, the lulav is possible. He says the following. He says, the reason why all these psulim, all these disqualifications apply to a lulav is because, listen carefully, ein bahem hadar. The word hadar, which let's say the best translation I can come up with is beauty, the Torah wants something beautiful. Again, this might also have to do with our original assumption about halil, that, this is not just the kiyum of a mechanical act of picking up the lulav, but it's also halil. But anyway, the Torah calls it hadar. And when the lulav is chopped off on its head or its leaves are separated, that's not called hadar. It's lacking in beauty. He says that the Mishnah was being mechadish something amazing. And that's why it started with lulav. And what is that? That is that the word hadar appears in the Torah. We go back to our pasuk. I think it's open in front of you. In what context, with regard to which of the Daled minim, does the Torah employ the word hadar? Only the etrog. But we have something called Torah Shebal Peh. There's Torah Shebechsav and there's Torah Shebal Peh. The word hadar in Torah Shebechsav refers specifically to what? To the etrog. But in Torah Shebal Peh, we have something called a hekesh. And that's when two things are written contiguously in the Torah, we equate the two. And because the lulav is next on the list, right after Priyate's hadar, we take the word hadar and we apply it to the lulav. How do I know that in halachic terms that's so? How do I know that the lulav, like the esrog, requires hadar? So I'm telling you because it's all in the same pasuk. Okay, fine. but where do you see it? Lamaisa. That's our Mishnah. The Chiddush of our Mishnah, by giving us a list of various kinds of lulavim that are not so pretty, if you want to use that term, like a yavesh, niktam rosho, nifridu olav, nifridu olav. All those lulavim are possible. Why? Because of hadar. And this I only know from Torah Sheba'al Peh. Because in Torah Sheba'al the word hadar only applies to what? To the etrog. So what gives me the chutzpah to apply hadar as a requirement that's critical and indispensable with regard to lulav? There's no hadar in lulav. The answer is there is hadar in lulav. But that I can only know from Torah Sheba'al Peh, which is called a hekesh. And now we have the following issue. What should the Mishnah mention first? That which is Torah Shebechsav or that which was Torah Sheba'al Peh? Give me a quick answer, Rav Osai, without thinking.
Torah Sheba'al Peh.
Okay, you're brilliant. You gave me the right answer, but I wanted the wrong answer.
All right.
I would have said Torah Shebechsav. I mean, after all, Torah Sheba'al Peh is an expansion. It's an embellishment of Torah Shebechsav. Right? The Torah Shebechsav was given by Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai.
It's a lower dragon than Torah Shebechsav.
So that's what the Gemara says in Masechet Yevamos. In Masechet Yevamos, when the Gemara analyzes the Mishnah there, maybe we'll have a chance to look it up, maybe not today, but the Gemara analyzes that whatever is derived to a drasha, which means Torah Sheba'al Peh, is chavivale. There's a certain chavivut, and it's beloved to the Tana, and it comes before that which is Torah Shebechsav. So I need the darshina le chavivale, and it comes first. Therefore, lulav.
Who's this?
This is Gemara in Yevamos.
No,
Who's saying it?
who says the whole thing?
I'm not sure. We'll look it up a little bit later. I just want to finish the idea. So he says the following: that the reason why lulav is precedent, what's the word? Is given precedence here in the Mishnah, and it's in sequence. It's first is because it's derived. Everything in that Mishnah about lulav is derived from Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's derived from a hekesh, because the Torah Shebechsav indicates that only an esrog requires hadar. Statement: the word hadar doesn't appear with regard to the other minim, but we have the Yud Gimel Midas HaTorah addresses them. One of them is hekesh, and therefore from a hekesh we're going to derive the conclusion that even a lulav requires what? Hadar. If you're going to derive it from a hekesh, which is Torah Sheba'al Peh, then it has a certain chavivus, and that gives its precedence. I thought that was brilliant. Tomorrow, Belina, I don't know, we still have a few minutes?
You
Oh,
don't know who the son.
so let's see if we can fit this into the Pnei Yoshua. This is the Pnei Yoshua, and I was very excited that Yaakov was able to find it here on the shelves. I thought it didn't exist.
He knows where everything is.
Now, but sure, when he made the library, he knew that you would be there.
Yeah.
He knew that Pnei Yoshua would be critical.
No, he knew that you would be coming.
All right, that I'm not sure, but maybe. Remind me tomorrow if you want to hear some stories about Rabbi Shimon. Anyway,
Sure. You have stories?
a few stories here and
You
there.
need them to be written down.
Okay. He says the following, that Haniral Anis Daiti, this is the Pnei Yeshua talking, his name was Falk, Rabbi Yeshua Falk, right, to say their Lashon HaMishnah, Kshisale, is very difficult. Why in the Seder of the Mishnah did Nokat Lulav Bereisha Makami Esra? That gives me a sense of empathy here. You know, I like the fact that the Pnei Yeshua is bothered by the same question. The Esrog Pasach Bayakasav Tchila. The Torah opens up with Esrog. And he says the following. Yesh Lomar, Do Yesvara de HaGazul lo mifsal el b'chai gavna. Oh, okay, 1 second. That's his second answer. I just want to find his first answer. I skipped a little bit. He says, he says, Shenomar came under the pashte de kra Lo shaminan ela psule hadar be esrog. He says that it would seem that from Pashtus to Kra, what does that mean, Pashtus to Kra? That means Torah Shebechsav. That's his language for Torah Shebechsav is Pashtus to Kra. And he says it would indicate that only an esrog requires hadar. He says, Mishum hachi akdume lulav. He starts with lulav, bekame esrog, before the esrog, kidamrina bereish parakama de biyavamas, ubekama dufti b'shas, to call midi di asya midrasha chavivole, v'shayach lakdume. He says that the sulim of lulav mentioned, delineated in our Mishnah, are based on Torah Shebal Peh, on a drasha, not on Torah Shebeksav. Because Torah Shebeksav seems to indicate that which is hadar, only the esrog is hadar. And he says we have a chavivus to dafka. It's like counterintuitive. I thought that Pashtus we should start with Torah Shebeksav. He's saying no.
This is what he brought in the book of it.
This is what the Masechet brought is based on this line in the Perek Yoshua. So again, we have really two approaches.
Does that mean that also Hadass and Arabot would also be under that category, especially since they're mentioned here?
Correct,
before,
excellent. Before the esrog, because they too are Torah Shebal Peh.
they would have Hadar.
Because hadar doesn't say not by Hadassim nor by Aravos. And then we have now two approaches. One is that lulav is the tallest of the minim, and therefore it starts in the Mishnah. And the second is because lulav and all the psulei hadar in lulav, like niktam rosho and nifetzu olav, are all derived from Torah Shebal Peh, and that's chavivul. So far today we learned one word in the Mishnah, just the word lulav, but we covered a lot. All right, so we'll stop here, and
very good.
I wish you a good day.
Thank you.
Okay, then. So both sides will learn Sanhedrin at 11 o'clock. Is that okay? Okay.
Okay, it'll learn